Welcome back to the channel. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more original horror content. Today's story: The Whispering Blackwood Forest. The rusted private property sign, half swallowed by an aggressive tide of summer weeds, stood sentinel at the edge of the old Blackwood forest. Perched atop it, a robin, impossibly bright against the encroaching shadows, chirped a cheerful, oblivious tune. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that truly permeated the woods beyond, a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence holding its breath. Evelyn Thorne, a woman whose life had been meticulously constructed on the bedrock of logic and reason, stared at the sign with a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She held a tattered, sepia-toned photograph, its edges softened by time and countless anxious touches. In the photo, a younger version of her father, a boy with bright, innocent eyes, stood grinning beside a girl whose face was slightly blurred, as if already fading from existence. Behind them, barely visible, was a similar sign, though newer, crisper, without the robin. "This is it," she murmured, her voice thin against the vast expanse of the forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and something else, something faintly metallic and sweet, like stale blood, that seemed to emanate from the shadowed depths. Her research, a frantic, desperate delve into dusty county archives and forgotten local legends, had led her here, to the Blackwood property. The place her father, now a gaunt, hollow-eyed man haunted by nightmares he refused to articulate, had forbidden her from ever mentioning. The place where his twin sister, Aunt Clara, had vanished without a trace 50 years ago. Evelyn tucked the photo back into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the cold, smooth grip of the old hunting knife she'd brought. A foolish precaution, perhaps, but the feeling that had gnawed at her since her father's recent rapid decline had grown into a full-blown conviction. Clara hadn't just run away. She had been taken, and whatever had taken her was still here. She pushed through the tall weeds, the sign scraping against her jacket, a warning she willfully ignored. The forest immediately absorbed the cheerful light of the late afternoon, plunging her into a perpetual twilight. The trees here were ancient, their branches gnarled and twisted like arthritic fingers, their canopy so dense that only slivers of sunlight pierced through, creating ethereal shafts of light that seemed to illuminate nothing but the oppressive stillness. This isn't just a forest, she thought, her breath catching in her throat. It's a cathedral of forgotten things, and something unholy has been worshipped here for a long, long time. The path, if it could even be called that, was faint, overgrown with moss and ferns. It wound deeper into the woods, leading her further from the familiar, comforting sounds of the distant highway. The cheerful chirping of the robin was long gone, replaced by an absolute quiet so profound it felt like a physical pressure against her eardrums. She found the stone wall first, almost entirely reclaimed by ivy and thickets. It ran haphazardly through the trees, marking an old property line, a forgotten attempt to tame the wild. Her father had spoken of it once, in a rare moment of lucidity, his eyes wide with a terror that hadn't yet been fully dulled by medication. "Never cross the wall, Evie," he'd whispered, his voice raspy. "Never look back once you do." Evelyn paused, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at the wall, then deeper into the woods. The air there seemed to shimmer, as if the very fabric of reality was thinner. A faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated in the air, a low-frequency thrum that resonated in her teeth. It was similar to the hum of power lines, but deeper, more organic, like the sound of something vast and alive breathing. She took a deep breath, the cold air burning her lungs, and climbed over the crumbling stones. The instant her feet touched the ground on the other side, the world shifted. The metallic sweet scent intensified, now mixed with something acrid, like burnt sugar. The trees grew even closer, their bark seeming to writhe, their shadows lengthening and twisting into monstrous shapes. The ground beneath her feet was no longer soft earth but compacted, strangely smooth soil, as if countless footsteps had worn it down over centuries. She saw the carvings then. Etched into the bark of the ancient trees were symbols she didn't recognize. Not letters, not images, but intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and reform as she looked at them. They pulsed with a faint internal light, like embers under ash, and radiated a subtle, sickly warmth. The hum was louder now, a resonant throb that seemed to penetrate her bones. And under it, a new sound, so faint she almost dismissed it as the wind, a whisper. Not words, not yet, but a collective sigh, a murmur of many voices just beyond the edge of audibility, like a crowd gathering in the distance. "Clara," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Are you here?" The whispers intensified, coalescing into something more defined. Still not words, but the cadence of speech, the rise and fall of intonation. It sounded like sorrow and hunger. She walked deeper, drawn by an invisible force, her mind screaming at her to turn back, to run, but her feet refusing to obey. The trees formed a claustrophobic tunnel, the canopy almost entirely blocking out the sky. The carved symbols grew more frequent, more elaborate, covering every surface, pulsing with that internal, malevolent light. And then she saw it. A clearing. It wasn't like any clearing she'd ever seen. The trees, instead of giving way, formed a perfectly circular, unbroken wall, their branches so intertwined that no light from outside could penetrate. The clearing itself was lit by an unearthly, phosphorescent glow emanating from the ground, a soft, green light that painted the ancient trees in eerie hues. In the center of the clearing stood a single, massive oak, its trunk wider than a small car, its branches reaching skyward like grasping talons. It was covered in the same strange carvings, but here they were bolder, deeper, glowing with a brighter intensity. And then she saw them. Dozens of figures, translucent and shimmering like heat haze, stood scattered around the base of the oak. They were old, young, male, female, dressed in clothes from various eras, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes wide and vacant. They moved with a slow, aimless drift, occasionally reaching out with spectral hands, as if searching for something they could no longer grasp. Evelyn gasped, a strangled sound that echoed unnaturally in the silent clearing. These were the lost, the vanished. The ones whose stories had become local legends, whispered with fear around campfires. And among them, near the massive oak, stood a girl with blurred features. Her hair was long, braided down her back, and she wore a simple, faded blue dress. She looked around Evelyn's father's age in the photograph. "Clara," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking. The girl turned her head slowly, mechanically. Her eyes, though vacant, seemed to fix on Evelyn. A faint smile, devoid of joy, ghosted across her lips. The collective whispers rose to a fever pitch, now a cacophony of individual voices, overlapping and indistinguishable. They were full of lament and despair, of forgotten names and unfulfilled dreams. But under it all, a new tone emerged, a low, guttural thrum that vibrated from the massive oak tree itself. The ground beneath Evelyn's feet began to hum, vibrating gently. The phosphorescent green light intensified, pulsating in sync with the tree's thrumming. The carvings on the oak began to glow brighter, the patterns twisting and reforming, drawing her gaze. She felt a pull, a subtle, irresistible tug at her very essence. It wasn't physical, but spiritual, a gravitational force pulling her towards the oak, towards the drifting figures. She felt a sudden, overwhelming weariness, a desire to simply lie down in the soft, green light and join the silent assembly. To finally rest. To be with Clara. "She's waiting for you, Evie," a voice whispered directly into her mind, clear and distinct yet alien. It was not Clara's voice, nor her father's. It was ancient, vast, like the rustling of countless leaves. Join her. Join them all. The peace here is eternal. Evelyn struggled against the pull. She wanted to. God, how she wanted to finally understand, to find the closure her father had never known. But something, a flicker of that Thorne's stubbornness, held her back. She looked at Clara. The ghostly girl was still smiling, but her eyes were completely empty. There was no soul there, only the echo of one. This wasn't her aunt. It was a projection, a law. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. This place wasn't offering peace. It was offering oblivion. The tree, the clearing, the whispers, they were all a grand, elaborate trap feeding on the despair and longing of those who ventured too far. It consumed their spirits, leaving behind these empty, wandering husks. It wants me. It wants my life, my soul. She pulled out the hunting knife, its cold steel a sudden, grounding reality in her hand. The ancient voice hissed in her mind, a sudden flash of anger in its vast indifference. A futile gesture, little one. You are already ours. The ground shook. The trees around the clearing bent inward, their branches clawing at the air. The spectral figures lurched towards her, their vacant eyes fixed, their silent mouths open in ethereal screams. The massive oak pulsed with a sickening, orange red light, its trunk appearing to distend, to breathe. Evelyn spun, her eyes darting for an escape. The wall of trees that formed the clearing seemed to press in on her, its branches interwoven into an impenetrable barrier. There was no way out. I won't join you, she screamed, her voice raw, defiant. You won't have me. She closed her eyes, and instead of the ghostly figures, she pictured her father. Not the broken, haunted man he was now, but the laughing boy in the photograph. The boy who had lost his sister. The boy she was trying to save, even if he didn't know it. She had to get back to him. The voice in her head roared, a sound that vibrated through her entire being, threatening to tear her apart. The ground surged beneath her feet, throwing her off balance. She could feel icy spectral fingers brushing against her skin, pulling at her clothes, trying to draw her into the throng. She dropped to her hands and knees, scrambling towards the edge of the clearing, towards the wall of trees that seemed to be closing in like a maw. The glowing symbols on the ground writhed, forming, twisting, hungry mouths. She found a gap, a place where two ancient trunks met, creating a narrow, almost invisible fissure. It looked too small, too tight, but it was her only chance. She jammed the knife into the soft earth, using it to pull herself forward, digging her fingernails into the rich, dark soil. The whispers intensified, now a desperate chorus of protest and rage, trying to fill her mind with doubt, with fear, with longing. Stay with us, Evie. Don't leave us. Don't leave Clara. She forced her body through the impossibly tight gap, her clothes tearing, bark scraping against her skin. She felt a searing pain as something sharp, something intangible, raked across her back, as if the forest itself was trying to hold her. She screamed, a primal sound of terror and defiance, and pushed harder. And then she was through. She tumbled out of the clearing, landing hard on the rough earth on the other side of the tree wall. For a moment, she lay there, gasping, her body aching, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The hum was still there, but distant, muted. The sweet metallic smell was fading. She scrambled to her feet, not daring to look back at the clearing. The air was still thick with the oppressive silence, but it no longer felt like a presence. It felt like a vast, empty space. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that it had to be away. She tore through the undergrowth, branches whipping at her face, roots snagging her feet. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs felt like lead, until she could taste blood in her mouth. She didn't stop until she saw the rusty private property sign, half swallowed by weeds, bathed in the gentle, fading light of dusk. The robin was gone. Evelyn collapsed beside the sign, her body trembling uncontrollably. She looked back at the wall, barely visible now in the encroaching gloom. The forest beyond seemed utterly still, utterly normal. But she knew what lurked there. She made it back to her car, her mind numb, her body screaming in protest. She drove away, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. Months passed. Evelyn never told anyone what she had truly seen. Her father, surprisingly, began to improve. The nightmares receded. A fragile lucidity returned to his eyes. He still didn't speak of Clara, but he would sometimes look at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, a mix of gratitude, sorrow, and a deep, unspoken understanding. Evelyn knew the Blackwood forest would always be there, silent and hungry. She would sometimes drive past it, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The private property sign, now even more consumed by weeds, still stood. One cold autumn afternoon, she stopped her car by the side of the road, overcome by an urge she couldn't explain. She walked to the edge of the forest, the wind rustling through the bare branches. The familiar, faint metallic sweet scent drifted on the air, barely perceptible. She looked at the sign, then at the tangled path leading into the woods. She almost missed it. Scratched into the bottom of the sign, barely visible beneath a layer of grime, was a new carving. Not an ancient symbol, but a simple, crude drawing. A robin. And underneath it, etched even more faintly, almost indistinguishably, was a single, blurred initial. C. Evelyn stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a scream. The forest was watching. It remembered. And somewhere deep within its ancient, hungry heart, Clara was still waiting. Or perhaps what remained of Clara. That night Evelyn Thorne slept with all the lights on, and she knew she would for the rest of her life. The robin, she now understood, was not a symbol of cheer. It was the eye of the forest, a silent, unblinking sentinel, forever watching for new souls to tempt across the wall.